We're back for another episode of Plead Your Case. We got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about the college football playoff format, who's getting in the NFL and the AFC, as well as some college basketball. Juwan Howard's had Michigan rolling as of late. And we're going to be defending a little bit of the NBA. Who's the greatest scorer of the decade? Please welcome my panelists from left to right, Jared Wiker, Bruce Davidson, Riley Holsinger, and myself, Sam Hixson. So sit back, relax, and it's time to plead your case.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Plead Your Case, WCTV's only national sports talk show.
That's kind of a hit or miss. You're either going to win big or you're going to just come out flat.
Those are the two other pieces of this team outside of James Harden that you need to focus on.
It's conference championship time in college football, and to be honest, there's a lot of debate about this new playoff format. We've had it now for a couple years. We take the top 4 teams as ranked by the association, and we send them to the college football playoff, and honestly, not a lot of people have liked it this day and age, and there's been a lot of ideas to change it, but I really want to get your thoughts. Are you buying or are you selling this college football playoff format?
I'm buying extending it because right now there's way too much controversy in the college football playoffs, and it's noticeable too. My plan for it's very simple. You put 8 teams in the college football playoffs, 5 of the Power 5 teams that win their championships, and then you put 3 teams at large. So the people that like to have that controversy still have the chance to debate about which teams should make the playoffs.
I mean, it's always up for debate. Then, because you're going to have the people that are complaining, the 9 and 10 seeds are going to be complaining. I honestly agree with you. I think having 5 at-large teams, or 5 conference winners, 3 at large, it would prevent, it's just a lot better. There's a lot of down space in between championship weekend and the college football, or conference championship weekend and the college football playoff. So you could fill some games there, and I honestly think that would just be a great take. I mean, Jared, what do you have to say about this college football playoff format?
Well, I'm definitely buying an extension to the amount of teams that get in, but I'm not saying there needs to be 8 teams. There needs to be 6. And I'm saying it should be the 5 conference winners, as they mentioned, but also 1 extra team. But I don't think they should rank the top 5 conference winners just in the top 5 and then 1 wild card, say. I think it should be the best 6 teams that are in the football, and it would solve problems in the past that we saw Notre Dame go undefeated, but they had trouble in the rankings because they didn't play an extra conference championship game. And we also saw undefeated UCF get in, but a lot of people said that they should have been in the playoffs because they were undefeated. Well, this solves this problem because, you know, if we go back to last year with UCF, we say, okay, you're undefeated, you get the 6th seed, let's see how you stack up. And so I really think it takes care, and it also keeps integrity of the game with a lesser amount of teams in the playoffs. I think 8 is just too many. 6 solves that. The top 2 teams would obviously get a bye in the first round, and the bottom 4 would go at it.
There's certainly a lot of factors to consider whenever you discuss this topic. I mean, strength of schedule has to come into play. I mean, it really depends who you've played, and there's a lot of debate for this number 1 and 2 seed this year, Ohio State, LSU, who's going to get that number 1 and 2 seed. And I think strength of schedule, you have to give it to LSU in that aspect. But Bruce, what do you really think about this college football playoff format, and how much does strength of schedule really matter towards that?
I believe, and I'm going to label myself on expansion as a cautious buyer, because here's what we have right now. We're arguing for this 4th spot between already slightly flawed teams in one loss: Georgia, Utah, Oklahoma, and Baylor. You open it up to 8, which is where I feel we're heading, because with 6, you start to get into the murky waters of, who gets a first-round bye, much like the NFL playoffs, although it's pretty easy to determine that. I feel like you open it up to 8, now we're going to start arguing between Wisconsin, Penn State, Alabama, Florida. My solution is similar to both of Riley and Jared's points, but with a twist. I think you need the 5 Power 5 conference champions. I am a supporter of conference championship games. They mean something to get to them. They mean something to win to them. I think you have 3 at-large bids, but this is where I'm going to throw a twist at the audience. You need to have some consideration for, in a case like UCF a couple of years ago, the best group of 5 champion. People don't know this right now. Memphis has more top 20 wins than Alabama. And that's honestly what we're going to come to. We expand it. Right now we argue top 5, top 10 wins. The bigger it gets, you're going to say, how many top 15 teams you beat? How many top 20? Now, in my version, that doesn't mean the best group of 5 champion is 6. They can be 6, 7, or 8. Consider the best group of 5 champion, 2 other wild cards, and then debate your Power 5 winners and debate your 3 at-large. So UCF a couple years ago, they could have been an 8, they could have been a 6, who hasn't? I just don't believe when I look at it that there are 3 non-conference champions that are all unequivocally better than the best group of 5 team.
I mean, the Power 5 conferences, it really comes down to some are obviously a lot better than others, and it's difficult sometimes for a team like maybe in the Big Ten to get more ranked opponents on their schedule than a team like in the SEC, because, I mean, LSU, they've played 5 top 25 opponents this year, and a team like Ohio State's only got to play 2 in Penn State and Michigan. So it's just overall been tough like that just for in terms of rankings. Like, you don't always get to face some of these teams that are outside of your conference. So.
Yeah, and extending the playoffs, I think that eliminates that risk of putting a group of 5 team into the playoffs where, like, you could throw UCF in there. You don't have to worry about, okay, if we only have 4 teams in the playoffs and we throw UCF at that number 4 spot when they were undefeated a couple seasons ago, and you just have them play in the first round, then they just get blown out. So there's not really a point to that. So I think it is better if you do expand the playoffs. And a lot of diehard college football fans are going to be able to watch all of the playoffs. They're not going to ignore it. They'll obviously watch it, and I think it'll be great for revenue for the NCAA. But the question is, would they end up doing it? I still don't believe they would.
Well, really, you need more teams in the playoffs as well, because then it also gives more teams recognition that have good seasons. You know, they might not be a top 4 team, but they can at least be, in my case, you know, a top 6 team, or if you go with theirs, top 8. So I think in general it's better. And when we look at scheduling, I think scheduling in college football needs to be revisited, because I think teams should have to schedule a certain amount of higher opponents than lower opponents. I mean, Alabama every year, you know, has a cake schedule and walks in. This year, Clemson has that. But we know they're still Clemson or Alabama. We know that they're good, but they still haven't played anybody. I really think they have to be forced to schedule at least a couple, you know, good teams.
Does opening up the college football playoff, does that take away from the significance of some of these bowl games, do you guys believe?
I feel like one thing that's already taking away the significance of the bowl games is the fact that you use 2 of the New Year's 6 games as semifinals. I've never been a big fan of a team being able to say, we were the Rose Bowl champion, but the second best team in the country because we lost in the final. I get the point of neutral site games, but I feel like the bowl games lose a little prestige as they had in the past with the automatic bids, you know, Big Ten, Pac-12, go to the Rose Bowl, etc.
Real quick, guys, top 4, who you got this college football playoff?
I have Ohio State, LSU, Georgia, if they can pull it off, but we'll see, and also Clemson.
Bruce?
For me, I'm going to go Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, and I think Oklahoma will get the 4th and final spot.
I agree with Bruce there. I have Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, and Oklahoma, because I don't believe Georgia is going to be able to beat LSU in the SEC championship game.
Gentlemen, great stuff, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next segment. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit of the NFL, who's getting in the AFC and the NFC this year. Don't go anywhere.
It's a Saturday night. You know what that means. Time to party. Sam is having a good time, watching sports, drinking beer, playing Pong. Not a care in the world for Sam. Nobody at the party stopped Sam. They let him walk out the door with his keys, even though he was stumbling, having a hard time to stand up. What happened less than 10 minutes later would change Sam's life forever.
Welcome back to Plead Your Case. The NFL season is coming down to the wire, and the AFC playoff picture is rather wide open right now. And guys, we're going to play a little game called the one-word game, and you're going to give me your one word to describe the AFC playoff picture. I know what mine would be. It would be open, just because there's not really any team right now that wants to take the reins other than maybe the Baltimore Ravens, but honestly, they have some vulnerabilities too, in my opinion. So, Jared, right down the line, what's your one word to describe the AFC playoff picture?
Well, the one word is definitely Ravens, and it's because of the Baltimore Ravens. They're 10-2, and they are the clear team in the AFC. Everybody else right now is definitely below them. Lamar Jackson is simply the story, maybe of the year. He could be the MVP. He's ranked 18th for passing yards with 2,500, just a little bit over that, and he also has 25 total touchdowns, second in the league. and 5 interceptions, tied for 9th, which is also very good. And he also leads the league with an 81.6 QBR. And, of course, we all know about his legs. He runs the field on people. He's an absolute monster. So the Ravens are the top dog in the AFC.
Honestly, I think that Lamar Jackson could be your MVP this year. I think another guy you have to discuss up there in that discussion is Russell Wilson, a guy who has a similar game, but overall Jackson's ground game is just very much superior to any quarterback in the league. It's honestly shades of Michael Vick. Maybe even someday we'll surpass Michael Vick in that aspect. But Bruce, your one word for the AFC.
My one word to sum up the AFC is cluster, because the NFC is top and bottom heavy. On that side, you have a bunch of teams fighting for the right to have home playoff games and some fighting for the right to have the top draft pick. The AFC, there are 5 teams, 6th through 10th, just fighting to get that last wild card from Pittsburgh on down to Cleveland. And with games like the Raiders and Titans coming up, it's not going to be decided until the final week of the season.
It's really incredible to think that some of these teams like the Steelers and Raiders are still around. I mean, the Steelers' defense, I mean, they speak for themselves. Their track record speaks for itself. Adding Minkah Fitzpatrick was arguably the move of the season by Kevin Colbert, but they're hanging around. The Raiders are hanging around, and a team I've really been surprised about is the Tennessee Titans. I mean, Marcus Mariota going down, Ryan Tannehill coming in. That defense really making a name for itself, beating some unusual opponents that they usually wouldn't beat. But Riley, one word, give me it.
I have intense. Now, the top of the AFC picture is intense because you have the Ravens and you have the Patriots. They're battling for the number 1 seed. But if the Patriots can't get that number 1 seed, they still have to be careful because of the Buffalo Bills, who are sitting at 9-3. The Bills are still very in the picture to take over the AFC East, which is very surprising. It's probably the first time we've said this in a lot of years. But even towards the end of the AFC picture, you have the Steelers, who are battling for that 6th seed, and they are holding on to it right now, with the Titans just right behind them. And then also in the AFC South, you have the Titans and Texans that are battling for that AFC South division. So it's just intense all around.
It's funny you talk about the Buffalo Bills because at the
Nobody
end of the day,
circles the wagons like them.
No one circles the wagons like the Bills, but at the same time, they still got to look out for Daddy at the top of the division. And that's the New England Patriots.
That's right.
I still think the New England Patriots at the end of the day will be around. It's still going to have to probably go through Foxborough at the end of the day. But the Bills have kept it close. I'll give it to them. They kept him. They gave him a game earlier on in the season. They kept it close, but Bill Belichick and company, when it comes December and January, you do not want to be in Foxborough, and it's looking like that's where the playoffs are going to go through again.
Yeah, and they certainly struggled against other teams the Bills have. I mean, Josh Allen, he's played very well these past couple weeks, and sure, I will say the Bills are definitely on a high right now, but at the end of the day, we know what the Buffalo Bills are. It's all about their defense. So when they play teams like the Patriots they haven't been too good this season on offense, but we know when teams can pick the Bills apart, their defense doesn't matter, and they will falter.
Do you think that a team like the Chiefs, their offense can just carry them through the playoffs? I mean, I honestly don't think their defense is really that strong. They have a tough environment to go into, but they're one of those teams that not a lot of people are talking about, but they still have the reigning MVP in the NFL and Patrick Mahomes.
See, I think the Chiefs team is better on defense than it was last season, but on offense, I don't think it's as good. Damian Williams and the other Williams running back, they're just not doing a good job carrying the workload for the Chiefs right now. And it's obviously that Patrick Mahomes isn't playing at 100%. He hasn't been as dominant this year as he was last season. And with Tyreek Hill hurt too, it just makes it very hard for the Chiefs to have a deep playoff run here.
If there's one thing I think that Mahomes definitely does with his receivers is he makes them better. And that's something, honestly, we talk about him, and he's honestly, in my opinion, the greatest of all time, and Tom Brady, but he's really just struggled kind of this year. It's not been a similar year for Tom Brady, and the defense has really stepped up for him, and I really don't think Kansas City has that defense to keep up with the Patriots. I mean, the Patriots, just overall top to bottom, have to be at least a top 3 defense, if not the top defense in this entire league. So, overall, who do you think that last wild card spot goes to? The 5-6 seeds are really up for grabs right now. There's a lot of teams battling for. We've mentioned the Titans, the Steelers, the Raiders. Who do you think comes out on top with that?
I think it's definitely going to be the Bills and the Steelers. I think the Steelers will be able to make it. I just don't see how the Steelers can get any worse on offense, so they're bound to get better, and they definitely will have some games that they can win and surprise some people.
Bruce?
I feel like the Steelers will hold on for the 6th seed, not because of their offensive ineptitude. I think it's more or less we know who Tennessee is. They're your typical 9-7 team. They still have to play the Texans twice. If they sweep them, then they're going to win the division. But I think they'll be lucky to even split with them. And Tennessee, I don't believe, will get that final spot. I think Pittsburgh holds on.
Riley, you got your duck caller.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Duck Hodges here, but I think Buffalo will probably have a playoff spot at that 5 seed if they can't catch up to New England. But I also have the Steelers at that number 6 seed. I believe their schedule's easier than most people think towards the end of the year. Now, a lot of people see that they have the Baltimore Ravens to play, but at Week 17, if the Ravens secure that number 1 seed, they probably won't play Lamar Jackson. They probably won't want to get him hurt. So the Steelers could see RG3, which will help them out a ton. And that would make the rest of the season very easy for the Steelers because the only tough team they'd have to play then is the Buffalo Bills on Sunday Night Football in a couple weeks. But I have Pittsburgh as that number 6 seed, Sam.
Overall, I think the Steelers have a very good shot of it. The one thing is they're playing a couple bad teams in the Cardinals and the Jets, and Mike Tomlin coached teams have struggled in the past against some of these worst teams, but it's up for debate. I honestly think the Bills and the Steelers end up securing that 5th and 6th seed, but gentlemen, great stuff as always, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit of NBA. Who's the best scorer of the decade? Is it James Harden? Find out on Plead Your Case. Welcome back to Plead Your Case. It's very early on in the NBA season, but James Harden has already registered a couple of 60-point games, and a lot of discussion nowadays. Is James Harden the best scorer of the 2010s? And guys, we're going to start this off. Bruce Davidson, 30 seconds. Is James Harden the best scorer of the decade? If not, who is your best scorer of the decade?
No, James Harden's not the best scorer of the decade. He only has 1,567 threes, and there's a guy that has 458 more, and that is Stephen Curry for the Golden State Warriors, a ridiculous shooter from beyond the arc, making shots that you don't think they have a shot to go in, and then there they go.
Well, Stephen Curry is, I honestly think, one of his former teammates has got to be the best scorer of the decade, and that's Kevin Durant. I mean, Kevin Durant's won an MVP. Stephen Curry has won a couple of them himself, but honestly, I think you give Kevin Durant the basketball 8 times out of 10, or 10 times, he's going to score at least 8 of them, because he can take it to the cup just about against anybody. Say he's 6'9", but in reality, he's probably standing about 7 foot, and he's got that large wingspan, the ability to shoot from the perimeter, and we wish him the best in his recovery. But Jared Wiker, I know you have a similar stance to mine, and why do you think Kevin Durant's the best scorer of the decade?
Yeah, he's definitely the best scorer. He's second on the list of scorers on the decade just for points. He's behind LeBron James. Kevin Durant has scored 19,445 points, which is just over 100 less than LeBron, but he's played in 31 less games. And Kevin Durant has also led the NBA in scoring in 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2014. That's 4 times. James Harden has only led the league twice. And James Harden has scored 18,627 points in 765 games, which is also 70 more games than Durant and 818 less points. So Durant, if you're just looking at the pure numbers at points, James Harden is not the best scorer.
Well, I honestly think Kevin Durant, it's his playoff legacy that's a lot better than James Harden as well. I mean, he's beaten James Harden multiple times in series. He's outperformed James Harden, at least efficiency-wise, in a lot of series. And I mean, it's just overall been the biggest difference in the rivalry that is the Houston Rockets and the Golden State Warriors. It's been the play of Kevin Durant and the inefficiency of James Harden at times. And Riley, I want you to step up to the plate. You're going to stick up for your man James Harden here, aren't you?
Well, a little bit here. So I'm going to do something. In the NBA, we saw co-rookies of the year a while ago. I'm going to go with co-best scorers in the NBA. So I'm having James Harden and LeBron James share that title. I have to give LeBron some love. But James Harden averages an outstanding 28 points per 36 minutes. And he's kind of bended the rules of the NBA in what people would call a softer NBA, where there's more fouls and more shooting fouls. James Harden, he draws a lot of contact, which leads to a lot of his scoring by getting to the charity stripe. And then LeBron James, I have him as well as Harden because he's just physically dominating. And he's been able to carry some pretty, I wouldn't say bad teams, but he's been able to carry his teams while being in the East and now being in the West.
And honestly, that's what's so great about LeBron James, just his diversity in his game. He's not only a scorer, he's a guy that averages over 25 points per game in his career, but he's not only a scorer, it's just the ability to dish out the ball, it's the ability to rebound. Whenever he feels like it, he's usually one of the better defenders in the NBA. So I want to talk a little bit about a guy that a lot of people would get the notion maybe that he is one of the better scorers of the decade, but maybe he's not because he had some success in the early 2000s, and that's Kobe Bryant. Where do you guys think Kobe stands at this point on this list in terms of the decade?
Well, obviously, if he played the entire decade, it would be a different story. But he kind of dealt with injuries towards the beginning of the decade, which kind of makes it harder to give that argument for Kobe. But he's still an amazing player. I would honestly consider him the greatest scorer of the 2000s decade, to be honest.
And we're going back. I want to talk about LeBron James again, just going back to him and just his body of work and what he's put into the NBA the last decade. And it feels like people almost don't want to give him credit as like one of those better scorers because like you think about, we've been talking about Durant, we've been talking about Curry, and LeBron's just a name that kind of got brought up sparingly because James Harden's been in the headlines a little bit more than him recently because of the 60-point games. And why do you think LeBron James gets that rep as just not this great scorer that everybody else is?
I think it's mainly just people don't want to admit that LeBron James is probably the greatest basketball player to ever play. I mean, a lot of people say that Michael Jordan's better, but I would say LeBron James in terms of talent is definitely the best player. I mean, you can say Michael Jordan is the winner, you know, he's 6-0 and whatever, yada, yada. But, I mean, in terms of pure talent, LeBron is the best. And in this decade, as I mentioned, he leads everybody in scoring, even though he's played some more games than Durant. But, I mean, LeBron James just is up there in every category you could really think of.
And I think part of that, too, is a lot of these people that are analyzing, they kind of grew up in that Michael Jordan era of basketball during the 80s and the 90s, which kind of adds up to that effect that they don't want to see their childhood hero be not named the greatest of all time basketball player. And kind of in our era, we kind of see LeBron James as the greatest of all time because that's who we grew up with at the moment.
To me, LeBron is a victim of his own success in the fact that he's done what he's done so well for so long that he gets overshadowed by the next splash in the pan or the next big thing. When you're consistently putting up 25 points a game, that's your job. But when you suddenly make a jump from 15 to 30, wow, look at that. LeBron's never going to have that to talk about because he was so consistently good for the whole decade.
Gentlemen, great stuff as always, and we're going to go ahead and switch over to the college side of basketball, and we're going to talk a little NCAA hoops. Juwan Howard and Michigan, they've been rolling as of late. Can they keep it going come March? We'll discuss that on Plead Your Case. It's our final segment here on Plead Your Case, and we're going to talk a little college hoops. Michigan's been rolling as of late. They went from unranked all the way to number 4 this week in the NCAA rankings. And gentlemen, this Juwan Howard-led team, they've been fantastic this season. Do you really think that they deserve to go from unranked to number 4 in just a week, though?
See, I think it's early enough in the NCAA hoop season that you are able to do that because it's not just going to be like something in the middle of the season, whereas earlier in the season they don't play as many games, so that's a little bit of acceptable for me. And then I honestly believe that Michigan probably should have been ranked entering the season very highly because this is a good team. They were pretty much unranked because of having Juwan Howard as a coach and not having the experienced veteran coach in John Beilein, but I don't think this is a stretch at all.
Honestly, I think they're very well led, and they've been a team that's consistently made noise in the tournament for the last decade and a half. So, Jared, do you think this Michigan team's even for real at this point?
I think they're for real. I mean, honestly, the rankings just show how good a team is at the moment, really. I mean, we always look back and say, wow, this team was ranked coming into the season, maybe even a top team, and now they're not, It's kind of like any other sport, really. We get these expectations in the preseason, and it doesn't mean much, but we just overrate or underrate teams based on the preseason. So I think Michigan does deserve with those 2 big wins over UNC and Gonzaga.
Bruce, what do you think about this Michigan team?
I think Michigan is deserving of a top 5 ranking. I feel like this is a solid team, as you mentioned. They were in the national championship a few years ago. And to Jared's point about the rankings, it's a recency bias. You're going to look at what have you done for me lately? And when we get later on into the season and deeper into conference play, that's when the rankings are really going to move less week to week.
Now, Juwan Howard's new coach here at Michigan, and he obviously played at the university. He was a very gifted basketball player there. But nowadays, coaches, they're put a lot more in the spotlight. There's a lot more access to what coaches have to say. And do you think that's going to benefit Juwan Howard down the road, or do you think he's going to be a guy that ends up succumbing to that pressure of having to deal with the media and having to deal with sometimes taking some heavy losses?
See, I think that kind of helps out with him being a former player for recruiting purposes and just for getting players to buy into his system, because they saw that, wow, Juwan Howard's been training this certain way for his entire career, or this is how practices were ran when he was a player. Like, they're more likely to buy into his system. And I was listening to the Michigan and Louisville game, and I heard that he's been giving his players a lot more freedom, something that college players like to have, because then they can choose their own practice schedule. They can choose when they want to lift, which is very big because he's giving his players some respect to make their own schedules and just do whatever he needs to do to help make that team be better consistently and help them win.
Certainly a double-edged sword, though. You think about it, you give players a lot of independence. They can also use it for the wrong reasons. And I certainly think you have to give, there has to be a certain amount of, there has to be some give and take. You can either give a certain amount of independence to a player, or you can just, there also has to be some discipline. There has to be some, you have to be at practice. You have to be in the weight room consistently. You have to be going to class. I mean, I feel like there's still a little bit of discipline, but as I mentioned, double-edged sword. And Jared, how do you think Juwan Howard is going to just be received to come March? He's been well received so far. Do you think March we're feeling the same thing about Juwan Howard?
Well, it's really kind of what you mentioned before. He's really going to be looked at based on how he acts as a coach. He's going to need to certainly tap into his experience as a player. And really, players, coaches of that sort really live and die by how much success they have. I mean, it's always nice when you're winning. You can let players do what they want to do, and it doesn't matter because you're winning, of course, over North Carolina and Gonzaga. But what about during the later part of the season if they struggle a little bit? Then all of a sudden there could be big tensions in the locker room, and all of a sudden the players have all these freedoms and they're not using their time as wisely, or they're slacking off. So really, players, coaches of that sort, I think, really are looked at based on how well they do.
Tough top of the conference this year for Michigan. Michigan State obviously is a great defensive team every year. They seem to be a team that's in the tournament just about every year. Does Michigan find a way to get past Michigan State and win that Big Ten?
I don't think they do.
No? Bruce?
I've been leaning toward Michigan State, and I've been a fan of them for years. Been through some disappointing brackets thanks to Michigan State, but I still feel like they are one of the top teams in the Big Ten.
For me, it doesn't matter as much. What matters is at the end of the year, March Madness, the NCAA basketball tournament.
They're going to be there?
Oh, they'll be there for sure.
Oh, they'll be there. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Great work today, as usual. And this has been another episode of Plead Your Case. Thank you so much for tuning in to WCTV's National Sports Debate Show. Have a good evening, everyone.
This has been a production of Waynesburg Community Television.